Ann Louden is a leader in the not-for-profit world with over 3 decades, including higher education, the arts, social services, healthcare, and community foundation work. She's led a $100 million capital campaign, managed fundraising staffs, built large-scale strategic partnerships, including a 60-member C-suite group of advisors to a CEO. She served on 12-year as a 12-year spokesperson creator for a national cancer awareness initiative, produced and directed and created 7 full-scale music videos with more than 2,000 participants. These things are epic. She shared a couple of them with me, and they're just mind-boggling how amazing they are. And she served as faculty for national fundraising conferences for more than 20 years. She's edited a book on raising funds in higher education. And if I'm not mistaken, I think she's writing one, if not 2 or 3 books at the moment. And always great to catch up with you. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Dave. Thanks so much for this opportunity to visit with you.
No, it's always good to catch up with you. You are I'm going to say recent from the standpoint of 2 years or so, New York, Manhattan person. You came to it, you loved visiting and stuff like that, but then you moved there. Obviously, life is different in Manhattan now. How are you changing your life because of the pandemic?
Well, you're so right to say that I am new to New York City. And so the 2 years that I was here pre-pandemic was a whirlwind of adjusting, a whirlwind of not being in Texas, where I'd been for 30 years, and learning to live vertically and loving it. And now I'm living vertically and not loving the restrictions, obviously, the pandemic has provided or has given us. But I think what I've really learned, besides how to go through recipes and find the best ones, and and all the things that we're doing to manage our lives in this sort of shutdown period, is that I need accountability partners. What I am really sure of is that I can't let myself down in this period, because if we are letting this come to us and letting it crush us, or letting it make us so fearful, we won't accomplish what's on our to-do list. And so I see this as a catalyst for change in every way. I'm rethinking all of my life. Even though I'm new to New York, I'm rethinking, okay, how do I function in New York? Is this where I should be now? What can I accomplish? And where do I need to put my energies? Because it's so tempting without a schedule and without the sort of rigor of our old lives that was just 4 months ago, that we can get lost in the watching the news or getting caught up in conversations. And I always love doing that, catching up. But so the idea of an accountability partner has come to me recently, when I have made contact with friends who were dealing with certain kinds of issues, and they wanted to be able to have somebody to hold them to the deadlines they set for themselves, or the goals they set for themselves. And I found people to play that role for me. And I think it's critical that in this time, without the structure, that the structure comes from someone who's deeply invested in us and becomes the person who says, okay, did you do what you said? And if you didn't do it, then why didn't you do it? And how can I help you?
Right. Well, that's fine. And that's the sort of the buddy system for adults,
That is the buddy system for adults. And a lot of adult children have come back to their parents and looking for those buddies when they were independent and functioning in their own way and in their own space. I have one adult child who's on the other coast now. She's in LA. But I've talked to her more post-pandemic to give her advice and counsel that she might not have accepted prior to the pandemic. She's been very interested in hearing what I have to say about things. So how long that will last, I don't know, but it's wonderful. I've loved it. And I've appreciated the fact that she is seeking that kind of accountability in a parent.
What is your sort of single best or one best tip for staying connected during these crazy high flux times?
Well, that's such a great question, Dave, and it is an interest of mine. I'm writing a book now. You mentioned a couple of books, and that's the case. The book that I'm really focused on, happened in the last year, is a book about connection as a leadership style, and how leaders can invest in others through investing in the relationships. So the book title is "A Connection is a Superpower, How Social Courage Gives Us the Edge in Life and Love." And I'm interviewing people all over the country that are connectors. And one of the messages I keep getting from those interviews is that we must practice gratitude. To care about somebody is to be grateful for them in our lives, whether they're mentors, their peers, their other leaders. And so I've come up with this concept of a gratitude timeline, which is essentially a connection timeline. So you and I met through a wonderful author and friend of yours and mine. Mm-hmm. And when I think of you, I think of being grateful to him for connecting me to you. And there are many benefits of getting to know you and meeting people at AMA and other ways that you provided me connections. Mm-hmm. There's always a source. We rarely are able to bubble up a wonderful event in our lives on our own. Maybe, but I've met people here in New York. You meet them everywhere. So sure. I've met people that I've connected with and stayed connected with. But often it's that 3 people removed or 5 people removed. Right. So if we go back and say thank you all the way back to the beginning of the chain, that's the best way, I think, to practice gratitude.
That's fantastic. That's great. Such great advice. And finally, the thematic question, the question I ask everybody, Anne, which is what lessons have we learned or are we learning right now that we must not forget?
Well, I've got 3 that I've thought a lot about. The first is that we absolutely cannot control change. Just when we think we've got our ducks in a row and our life in order and we're fulfilling the plans that were on our list of to-dos, something happens to us. And not just this experience, not with just COVID, but some big astronomical change in our lives. I've had many. One was cancer. And when I thought I knew exactly how life was going to unfold, it didn't unfold like that at all. And so what I learned in that time, and that was 15 years ago, but it's changed my life dramatically and maybe given me coping skills for now. I would say that what I learned then, which is that you can control your attitude towards everything. Mm-hmm. You're in charge of you, and we can respond with emotion as we did when we were younger, when we didn't have that executive reasoning function that had kicked in. I think it's kicking in later for young adults now. I think it's like age 26. Mm-hmm. But we have the capacity to have logic in the way we react. Mm-hmm. We also have the capacity to curate what we see that creates anxiety or that doesn't. So I believe we've got to accept that we control ourselves. And that's a lesson that all of us have had to learn in this time. The second lesson is that leadership in crisis matters, and that there are 3 ingredients, I believe, that make leaders successful, but also make them capable and willing to be followed by followers during crisis. The first is transparency. We really want to know what it is that requires the leadership in that moment, particularly in crisis. We need to understand the good and the bad and the ugly. The second part of that leadership style is the ability to have empathy. So we want leaders that care about us, that express that they're concerned for us, whether they can touch our lives directly or not. It's not necessarily true that they can, but if they can get our circumstances and understand it and act on that, that's so helpful. Mm-hmm. And the third is that we want them to be able to source resources that we cannot. Mm-hmm. So we want our leaders to be able to touch the solution. And as we've seen with all the challenges of COVID and not understanding the trajectory and where it's gone and how we can manage it, this skill set requires people to change, to pivot. Mm-hmm. But when leaders get stuck in the same kind of routine of sticking by something that may or may not be correct information for a new set of circumstances we've learned, then they're failing to lead. Right. And we must have leadership. The third point is that I said earlier, we can control our attitude towards change. But this one, I think, has hit us all, and that is we must be advocates for our own health. And now, again, as a cancer survivor, I've learned to see what my symptoms are, if I have any, and get them cared for, monitored. We have to be proactive. And we see this horrific stories of people that are too afraid to go to the hospital, and they have life-threatening conditions unrelated to COVID, but they're not willing to be proactive because the fear is so great. Right. And so we have to know that without our health, we have nothing. Right. Without our caring for ourselves, we have nothing. And so those 3 things to me are the most important.
All right, Anne. Hey, listen, thanks so much for your time. I know we'll be talking again real soon. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, you too.